And joining me now is Daniel Levy, political commentator and president of the U.S. Middle East Project. He was a former Israeli negotiator with the Palestinians at Taba under Prime Minister Ehud Barak and at Oslo B under Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Thank you so much. It's always good to see you, Daniel. What are your thoughts, if you would, on this colonial board of peace?
Good to be with you, Joy. Really is. It does feel like a kind of Dutch East India Company for the 21st century. It is remarkable that anyone is taking this seriously, if indeed they are, as something that can constructively offer something to the Palestinian people of Gaza. I want to offer one caveat, which is we do have to remember that the previous administration, the Biden administration, failed even to achieve a ceasefire. I wouldn't argue that what we have today is really a ceasefire, but what we have had is a significant downscaling in the killing. Now, that is obviously not what a full ceasefire should look like. Palestinians are being killed every day, almost 500 since the so-called ceasefire, but it's not the thousands that we were seeing, the triple digits on a daily basis. We still don't really have the humanitarian aid, especially the things that are most desperately needed, shelter, medicine, coming in at the levels that were agreed. And Israel is, of course, still in direct occupation of 58% of Gaza. Nevertheless, the president is telling us that after 3,000 years, we have peace in the Middle East. And Jared Kushner, as you suggested, they did manage to get the slides in English, written in the correct order. Sharif from Dropsite just pointed out that they didn't manage that in Arabic. But, you know, Jared was offering us something that looks straight out of someone who doesn't have much experience of using ChatGPT, offering a panoply of lies as to what is happening now in Gaza and what will happen in the future in Gaza. And let's not forget, people have profited from this genocide. We've heard of war profiteering. This is genocide profiteering. And the same people who set up that so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which tried to take over in a way that guaranteed and was designed to fail as a way of providing aid to Palestinians, but succeed as a way of killing more Palestinians. The same people who put that into place are the same people being entrusted with that next phase. How do you think that's going to go, Joy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll go exactly as we assume. You know, when I was listening to Jared, I listened to his full speech. It sounded like they're setting up something that's somewhere between the mandate of Palestine that the Brits set up and the way that the British governed India, with these sort of locals who are almost sort of the overseers of their own people, these Palestinian technocrats. Any idea who these people are and what is their loyalty to the people as opposed to their loyalty to the developers? Because it seems like, at least from Sharif Quddus's reporting, they are systematically continuing the flattening of the places they bombed, clear-cutting them, and already preparing to build these real estate developments.
So there are a few things going on here, Joy. First of all, as you just suggested to us, these very schemes offer another layer of permission, almost, to Israel, not that it asks anyone anyway, to carry on the destruction. So Israel right now continues to shoot Palestinians, bulldoze buildings, take over additional land. Now it can say that it is doing so in order to implement the remit of the Board for Peace plans for redevelopment. And you have private contractors in there who are part of doing that. So that's one of the things that's going on, is that you still have Israeli control, you still have daily destruction, and it seems that those same people will oversee any of these developments. That's one thing. The second thing is this, it's called the NCAG, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. That is where the Palestinians are sitting. There's a chap who was a Palestinian Authority a technocrat. They've called this a technocrat committee called Ali Shaf. He is heading it. No one chose those Palestinians. Well, actually, a handful of outsiders helped pull them together. I I don't want to impute entirely bad intentions to all of those people. I think some of them are looking at this and are being told by the external regional interlocutors, listen, one of the excuses the Israelis are putting forward for not withdrawing, for not moving forward, is there's no one to hand this on to. You haven't been chosen by the Palestinian people. Your body is not even called a Palestinian body in its name. It's called Gaza. And part of this imperialism 2.0 strategy is to silo, to bifurcate further, to separate different parts of Palestine, not call it Palestine, call it Gaza. Let's talk about Gaza, not Palestinians. Nonetheless, Palestinian factions, to a significant degree, even though, again, they're not elected, have said, look, let's agree on this committee so that that removes one layer of excuse. I don't think it's the right strategy by the regional mediating parties or by the Palestinian factions, because that's not going to be enough for Israel. Israel's not going to say, oh, this is the committee we've been waiting for. Now we'll withdraw. That's all we wanted. They will continue to place a bar, for instance, of disarmament in a place intentionally pitched so that it cannot be reached. Hamas have put forward pragmatic proposals of what could be done. They've agreed to this committee. Governance was never the issue. They've agreed to certain options that, in the history of liberation struggles against apartheid, against illegal occupations, what they've offered are actually very reasonable proposals. So what I'm saying is that this Palestinian body may be designed to strip away an Israeli excuse, but that's not going to be enough. And I think the whole approach that we've seen from, there are 8 Arab and Muslim majority states who President Trump in New York, in the margins of the UN General Assembly in September, first put this 20-point plan to. Those 8 states were all there, represented. They made up almost half of those present at the Board of Peace. And I think what they were saying is, we're going to stick with this approach where, by being in the room with Trump, we can try and steer him away from Israel's most cruel, most destructive, most maximalist schemes. That's what they're trying to do. I don't think it works. I think you have to stand up to Israel, stand up to Trump. But that's the context of this Palestinian body and of those countries being part of that Board of Peace.
What do you make of the fact that, basically all of our allies, all of the Western nations have refused to join what really does look like a Trump mafia? Like, he's created himself as the mafia don, and he said you have to pay $1 billion to get in. It's like, it's been described by Michael Wolff, a global Mar-a-Lago. And then you get to be in the room while he permanently chairs this board. What do you make of the fact that all of Europe said absolutely not, as did Canada, and then Trump disinvited him after he said no?
You're suggesting that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is not the beating heart of Europe there, Joy. So look, what you have is, you've got a grouping, some of whom are carved in the image of Trump himself. So that is Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, Argentinian President Milei, Paraguayan President Peña. One person, unfortunately, couldn't make it because he would have been arrested and sent to the International Criminal Court had he have stepped foot in Switzerland. That's our own favorite, Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. So you've got a man with a ICC, International Criminal Court, arrest warrant against his name. That's part of the makeup. Another part of the makeup I just described to you, it's those 8 Arab Muslim majority states. They actually, in signing up, said this is in order to implement Gaza, even though, as we pointed out, the word Gaza is not mentioned in the Charter of the Board of Peace. And I think the others who are there, and it's a very small grouping right now, Joy, okay? It's barely 10% of the member states of the United Nations. So this was not, to my mind, a show of strength in Davos this week in this Board of Peace. I think most of the others are looking at this. No one is saying, you know what? This is fabulous. This is my way to contribute to peace and a better world. I think they're looking at this and saying, how do I manage my equities with Donald Trump? And that's what most of those who went along were trying to do. The vast majority aren't there. And if we take a step back, because if you look at the Charter of the Board of Peace, it's It's farcical, as you say. Trump can disband, can kick anyone out, can add anyone. He's the only one who decides on the agenda, etc. But if you step back and look at what is going on here, I think this should be understood as part of an attempt to reassert American primacy via a strategy of bullying through the person of Donald Trump. I think the premise is flawed. American primacy will not be reasserted. I think the strategy that you simply throw your weight around, you bully your allies, you think that you can corral everyone through threats into doing what you want. You're only losing friends this way. You're actually displaying weakness. You lost your tariff war against China. You're not winning at the moment against Europe on Greenland. You've tried to assert primacy in the Western Hemisphere, but actually you've cut a deal with the Maduro regime just without Maduro. So the strategy is flawed. And of course, the most flawed part of this in all of it is the very flawed human being who's leading it, this person who is a combination of vanity, insecurity, and petulance. So Mark Carney gives a speech and Donald Trump sends out a Truth Social posting. I didn't like what you said. You're not invited to my party anymore. Mark Carney's speech at Davos, I think, will be remembered in history far more than the ceremony of the Board of Peace.
I agree. I've argued earlier in the show that he may be the person, while we may not have a leader of the free world anymore, we may be past that historically. But if there is one at the moment, somebody who's speaking truth to power with the greatest clarity, I would argue it's Canada's Prime Minister Carney. My exit question to you is that it seems to me, if you look at the polling, Israel has fallen for the second year in a row to the bottom of global rankings. People despise the Bibi Netanyahu regime. And by definition, it's also harming Israeli citizens, athletes who try to apply their craft abroad. They've dropped really in just esteem around the world. And so has the United States. Just as somebody who's looked at the world from the point of view that you have, as somebody who's acted in the international realm, is the American era over, and is the era of Israeli sort of primacy over?
I think those are very good questions. And I think one of the things you have is a commonality that in attempting to reverse that trend, both the US under Trump and Israel are doubling down on throwing their military weight around as what they can fall back on. Now, I think that looks different to the US and Israel. I think in America, the primary failure, if one puts Trump aside just for a moment, because I think the Biden administration attempted this as well, the primary failure is the inability and the unwillingness to acknowledge and act on a reality of multipolarity, a reality that the era of American primacy, if it ever existed, was short-lived. It is certainly not here today. And you are better off as America if you acknowledge that fact and work within that reality. Israel is kind of going in the opposite direction and saying, this is our moment to assert regional domination. So yes, we've talked about Gaza, and Israel is on trial at the International Court of Justice for the crime of genocide, and provisional measures were issued which Israel ignored. But it's not just Gaza, of course. We see that Israel is conducting its most destructive actions. The displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank is on a scale we haven't seen for decades. Israel is occupying part of Syria, part of Lebanon. So this is an extremely ambitious agenda. I would suggest it's massive overreach, and that not only is that deeply unpopular in the world, but even the regimes in the region who were willing to put up with an awful lot are beginning to say, whoa, wait a minute. This is a threat to us, to our leadership. This is destabilizing, it's radicalizing. We have to get to grips with this. They haven't yet come up with a strategy for working together to contain and deter Israel, which would have to include, one imagines, a military component. But I would suggest that both the US and Israel are digging themselves deeper into a hole, especially when you bear in mind a couple of other things. One is shifting geopolitics. We touched on it earlier. It's very telling that, and I agree with you in the assessment of Mark Carney, it's very telling when the Prime Minister of Canada not only gives the most memorable explanation of what the world today looks like, and his major point there is the idea that we had a rules-based international order was a fiction. Now we actually have to build as many of the elements of that multilateral institutional architecture of rules that we all try and adhere to, because everyone is better served by that. And he spoke in particular about mid-level powers. But of course, it also applies to small states even more. So the majority of the world is very ill-served, the vast majority, by what Trump is trying to do, and the geopolitics are shifting. Because where did Carney arrive in Davos from? From China. And so much of the rest of the world is looking at this today and saying, you know what? I need China inside this. China is setting itself up to be a more predictable, rational, multilateral actor. Even things like clean energy. Look what the Chinese are doing there. America is so far behind that when it finally wakes up and realizes that is the future, it will not be able to catch up. And the rest of the world is hedging. The rest of the world is saying, how do I insulate myself, insulate my country from the fallout of what is now an accelerating American decline? And so I think that's America going to fail. And if we go back to Israel, Israel is not going to be able, I would argue, to carry forward its extremely ambitious, zero-sum, destructive agenda in the region indefinitely. And something else is going on, which is Israel is ever more dependent on the US,
That's right.
which I would say is weakening itself globally. And Israel is more of an area of disagreement, more of a contentious, controversial issue inside American politics on both sides of the aisle, something totally new, the fight that's going on inside MAGA than it ever was. And that's, Joy, before we even touch on what's going on domestically inside Israel, which is a huge mess. And before we touch on what's going on domestically inside your own country, because we've looked at everything from the external perspective, but look at America today. I don't need to tell you this. Look at Minnesota. Look at what's happening with the Federal Reserve. Is this a country that is projecting internal strength as a way to show its external strength? I would say categorically not.
No, it's ironic that Donald Trump is said to by people his those who disparage him to be a Russian agent bringing down the United States on behalf of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin. But in the end, it won't be Putin who benefits from the decline of the American empire and the Israel being the little minnow stuck on the whale of America, probably pull their empire down too. It will be China. We may be entering the Chinese century. Daniel Levy, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much. Please come back.
Pleasure is mine, Joy. You take care. Stay warm.
Cheers. I will try. I will try. I will try.